Hello and welcome to my little trip down road testing memory lane. Now, for today's video, I've dug out a couple of MCNs from the beginning of 2012. And they're little crackers because they talk about Ducati's 1199 Panigale. So this bike here, you could argue, is probably Ducati's most important motorcycle since they produced the 916. Obviously we all know the 916, then we came out in 93, kind of dominated superbike racing, was an instant classic, an instant beauty, and one everyone loved, and one that Ducati kind of struggled to replicate its success. You know, they brought out the 999 afterwards. That was a bit of a flop. But this Panigale 1199 replaced the 1098 and 1198, and the project kind of began. We're thinking about the project anyway in 06 when the 1098 had just been signed off and it was out in the wild. So they started on this bike then, and the actual project began in earnest in 2008. It was code named 0801. Talking about that 1098 and the 1198, I spoke to Claudio Domenicali at the launch of the 1199 Panigale in Abu Dhabi, and he told me that the 1098 was kind of rushed out because the 999 was such a flop. Ducati needed to do something to really sort of restore their reputation and make all their dealers happy. A lot of dealers didn't want to be selling Ducati anymore, so they produced the 1098. That was basically kind of, it moved the game on from the 916, so it was back to having, you know, the distinctive twin headlights, single-sided swing arm, that kind of thing. And it was a good bike. It wasn't brilliant. It was kind of a bit down on power compared to its superbike rivals, because, you know, now you're talking about the class of the GSX-R1000 K5 and 6, the great R1s that happened in the latter part of the noughties, Blades, ZX10s, Aprilias, all that kind of stuff. A young man called Gian Andrea Fabro designed the Panigale. He also designed the 1200 Multistrada, and you've got to tip your hat to him because it's an absolutely beautiful bike, and one that's kind of evolved into the V4 that we know and love today. The 1199 Panigale was completely groundbreaking for Ducati. So it had a completely new engine, 195 bhp Super Quadro engine. It was frameless, so basically the engine was the chassis. It had the swing arm bolted to the back of the engine. It had a monocoque aluminium kind of cast section on top of the engine, and everything was bolted to that, including the forks and the tank and all the ancillaries. And also had groundbreaking electronics. You know, hot on the heels of the S1000RR, which kind of started that proper electronics race. It had all the bells and whistles. And it made a lot of power. So 195 bhp was more than the S1000RR of the day, and it only weighed 188 kilos wet. So, you know, when we all saw the spec sheets, when the bike was shown at all the international bike shows, we could not wait to see it. It's evolved into the Panigale V4 we see today, which is undoubtedly one of the finest superbikes money can buy. You know, it's the plaything of MotoGP riders, isn't it? You know, even now it's a week before the Mugello MotoGP, and already you're seeing pictures of Ducati factory riders on Panigales practicing at Mugello. So, you know, and at some tracks those bikes can lap within a few seconds of a MotoGP bike. So there's no question that the Panigale V4 is a phenomenal machine, better than any mortal could really get the best out of, unless you're a top racer. But the Panigale 1199 didn't really have the smoothest path. The 1199 didn't win any group tests that you'll see later, because it was a little bit angry, and it kind of stayed angry really all the way through its life. all the way through the first V4s, and now finally electronics have saved the day for the Panigale. They've just smoothed it right off to the point where the Panigale is really, really easy to ride. The 1199 spawned lots of special versions, from the S version with O-lins and electronic O-lins, all that kind of stuff, to the homologation special Rs. You had the Tricolores, you had the Anniversarios, you had the final editions, and you had two Superleggeros. The first one was an all magnesium affair, and the next one was carbon fibre. And of course it spawned the baby versions, just like the 916 did with the 748, and the 999 with the 749, the 1098 with the 848. So Panigale spawned the 899 Panigale, the 959 Panigale, and now the V2 Panigale, all based on this layout. The launch was in Abu Dhabi, proper rock and roll. It's the Yas Marina circuit you probably see on Formula One. It's a track that kind of winds its way around a hotel complex. It's like playing a PlayStation game. It's absolutely amazing, really surreal to ride a bike around there. And that kind of added to the specialness of the event. Troy Bayliss was there. I'd actually flown there directly from another launch. We'd been at Paul Ricard earlier that week in freezing cold conditions, which was the opposite to the Panigale, and ridden the new MV Agusta F3 675, which wasn't, you kind of got the feeling they rushed that out because the fueling on it was pretty bad, the ride-by-wire was pretty bad, and it's something that they didn't really get to grips with until recently. The newer ones are a lot better. They're still not perfect, but they're a lot better. So yeah, as a road tester, the beginning of 2012 was pretty special, flying around the world riding these amazing bikes. The bike was so important for MCN that not only did I go to Abu Dhabi, we brought along our photographer and videographer just so he could get some great pictures and video. If you have a look at the video online, it's pretty cool. We experimented with this strange onboard camera, which is basically a massive broomstick that went on my helmet and kind of swiveled round with a GoPro on the end, and it kind of gives the impression the camera's following you around, which you can get GoPro sticks to do now. A lot simpler, a lot easier. But back then it was pretty crude. And we also flew ex-world superbike champion Neil Hodgson to come out with us. Now, Neil spent a few years being a guest tester for MCN, and I was always a big fan of Hodgson, as I'm sure many of you are, you know, from his riding and his commentary. He's such a really nice guy as well, really, really humble. You know, when you speak to him, he talks to you on your level, like you're the same level rider than he is, which obviously not many people are. So we brought him with us to help us test the bike as well, to kind of give a proper racer's opinion, and I gave the numpty's opinion. So it was a big deal in the paper. It was an 8-page launch special. Fantastic pictures, fantastic weather. I mean, just, you know, some of the quotes from the test. You know, bear in mind the 1098 was a little bit lazy, a little bit long, a little bit bouncy. Wasn't that sporty really. You could almost call it like a Grand Tourer really as a road bike. Obviously the Ducati race bikes were a lot different. Factory Ducatis are always a world apart from road bikes, but you know, when we rode this, it was completely different. You know, we talk about things like how hard it revved. You know, this new Super Quattro engine just had an appetite for revs like a 4-cylinder. It was hard hitting. It felt like a race motor. The brakes were brutal. It was nimble, which was really different to how it was before. Fast steering at last. You had a much shorter reach to the bars. The bars were more aggressive, more laid out in the modern style, kind of quite forward but quite wide. Loads of leg room, which was quite interesting. So it's actually quite a comfortable bike for bigger riders. Not a lot of low down grunt, but that's a good thing because it made the bike a little bit kinder off the corners, whereas the 1098 and 1198 had so much initial torque, it just tied the thing in knots. And light, so 14 kilos lighter than an MV Agusta F4, 6 kilos lighter than an S1000RR. I mean, I'll just get the old bins on and just talk you through a couple of the pages. So, you know, some of the technology here, you know, we talk about the engine. It's the most over square engine of any production bike at the time. Cam chains instead of cam belts, so obviously the service intervals went right up. Loads of new technology in the engine. Also had a full brace of riding modes, so you've got race mode, sport and wet, and within those modes you've got different levels of traction control, ABS intervention, and on the S model different suspension. The suspension was Öhlins. You also have on the standard model Marzocchi forks and shock. You had a different linkage for the rear shock that you could turn from progressive to flat depending on whether you're on a track or the road. You've got 330mm brake discs with Brembo monoblock calipers, just brutal stopping power. Completely new styling, LED front and rear lights, which was quite new then. Big tyres, lightweight wheels, 250 section, 255 rear tyre, which was huge back then. Ducati kind of lead the way when it comes to big fat balloon tyres. You've got 260s now on the modern day Panigales. Traction control, engine braking control, just jam packed with technology. And then we thought we'd speak to some of the other journalists from around the world. So Claes from Bike Magazine in Norway. I ride a 1098R, and at first I didn't feel the grunt I was expecting, so it's something to get used to. Using more revs and sometimes one gear lower than normal. The steering is light like a 600, but with the power of 1000 it's amazing. I think there must be something wrong with Stoner and Rossi because the front end is very planted. Well, I think he's talking about the GP bikes. Remember they used to lose the front all the time. Toshi from Japan, a freelance journalist. It's very light and the performance is high. Braking stability is good. Its turning ability in a corner is impressive. The more aggressive you are with a Panigale, the better it is. That's something that's carried on throughout the range because it's such a stiff bike. It responds to you pushing very, very hard, which is why it probably isn't the easiest bike to ride. It's easier to ride a softer bike hard unless you're really, really experienced. Judo from MO magazine in Germany. It's a totally different Ducati. When I first sat on it, I didn't recognise it until you start the engine and it's familiar. It's a mixture of very modern features and the old Ducati DNA. Robert from PS magazine. Mean people may say Ducati tries to copy the RSV4 because the Panigale is also built as a race bike and adapted for the street. It's a very nimble handling and is missing a bit of straight line stability due to the small fairing. Well, that's a kind of a story that followed with a small amount of instability, but we'll get onto that. Overall, the suspension is too soft, but you can adjust it. It's a big step ahead of the 888. It's like the 888 to the 916 in terms of the step ahead. And Andrea from Motorrad magazine. It's a big step ahead from the 1198 in terms of power and handling. You can use a wider range of revs, especially lower down where it's not so harsh. At first you don't believe it has 195 bhp because it's so usable. It has such a good throttle connection and light clutch. It handles so well and has such a good riding position you wouldn't believe it's a Ducati. So yeah, really is a step on. And then we've got a whole spread talking about the Yas Marinas track and Hodgson. I mean, this was quite a heavy duty launch. You know, it was a really lovely experience being there, but you know, basically I had to write 8 pages worth of MCN during the evening after the ride, which was tough going. And I'm sure I can hear little violins out there. But yeah, Hodgson said it feels like a race bike. It's a missile. And I remember interviewing him after our sort of track day, and he was just absolutely buzzing about it. He also says the bike feels rock solid on these fast corners, and I feel at home and totally relaxed. So Neil's verdict was, I'd love to spend more time on the Panigale. I can't believe it's a road bike. It'll do 15,000 miles between servicing, but feels quick like a race bike. My old WSB engine would get changed every 500 kilometres. Well, that's why Ducatis used to be so successful, because they used to tune them to the moon and then let them break or change them just before they broke. It feels stiffer than the old style frame, because it hasn't got a frame. The bike still moves around, which I like, but it's stiffer in places, definitely on the front end. well, that was kind of characterised the Panigale's kind of one of its biggest strengths was its braking stability, because it was so stiff at the front. The brakes were absolutely superb from a stability point of view and from a power point of view. If I had more time on it, I'd adjust the front suspension. The only thing we played with were the electronics, which I was impressed with. We made adjustments and felt positive changes. I didn't even think about the quick shifter, which is great. Braking is good, and this track is special for heavy braking. 180 down to 30 mile an hour in 2 areas. It's a bit too roomy for me, and the bars feel a bit too wide. I need them a bit more compact and pulled in. I can't believe how roomy it is for how dainty it looks. It was a roomy bike. Apart from needing a larger screen, I think bigger riders will love it. Well, that's true. I'm a bigger rider and I really enjoyed the riding position of that. I'm so impressed. It's a nice feeling to get off a bike and be left wanting more. That's why we ride bikes. So the big thumbs up from Hodgson. And then from our point of view, so we rated it. The engine was 5 stars out of 5. The fastest, easiest to ride Ducati. Electronics, 5 out of 5. Cutting edge, enhanced the riding experience. Handling, fastest steering Ducati ever. Quality, the best of the best components on the S anyway. Value, 4 stars out of 5. You know, this bike is £19,750. So it's a lot of money in 2012, a lot of money. Unattainable for most, true exotica. Desirability, the new superbike benchmark. You know, if you think of its rivals of the day, it was a very, very special machine. And my verdict, so the Panigale is a quantum leap forward over the 1198. This is as advanced and powerful as a Ducati World Superbike with handling to match. I think Ducati have proved now that their road-going superbikes are pretty close to their actual race bikes. Obviously, the race bikes evolve all the time and they get better and better, but the road bike is closer to the race bike than any other road bike you can buy. With all the electronics fit, it's a standard to the S model we tested. It's a lightweight 195 bhp toy box, a blood red track day sledgehammer. Once we get it on a dyno, we're sure the Panigale will have one of the best power to weight ratios of any superbike. It revs as hard as a 4-cylinder, is smooth, and has a shouty V-twin soundtrack to die for. But for such a powerful bike, it's easy to ride thanks to the tamer low-down grunt. So you can go through fast corners without sending the Ducati into a one-wheeled wobble monster like before. Must have been very late when I wrote that. It's as nimble as the best in the class, and the riding position is heavenly. The gearbox is improved, as is the way the Panigale smooths out corner entries with its slipper clutch and electronics, something we take for granted now on modern day superbikes. The riding modes, electronic suspension, quick shifter and dash are brilliant, as is the frameless chassis. Ducati testers think it gives the Panigale more front and feel than the 1198, which it proves to have done. It shows that whatever happens in MotoGP has little to do with road bikes. So yeah, so back in 2012, it was a Rossi era, wasn't it? And Ducati were really struggling in MotoGP. The complete opposite to now, where the V4 Ducati you buy now has got a MotoGP derived engine from the 2014 Desmosedici. It's got MotoGP derived chassis, electronics, everything. So there's more of a link now. But yeah, MotoGP wasn't going too well for them back then. So the next stage of our test, after we'd ridden this, we came back absolutely buzzing, and then we went to organise our first group test. So this is April 2012, and it was at a time where MCN had kind of evolved as well. So we got a lot of very talented people in to help produce and create MCN. And you know, I think in this era of MCN it was as close to a weekly glossy bike magazine as it's ever been. It was so detailed. We spent a lot of money on creating lovely features, doing beautiful pictures, really going to town. And you know, just looking back through this MCN now, you know, bear in mind, where's the price? You know, it's less than £2. It's very, you know, good journalism costs a lot of money. I mean, you know, group test alone, can you imagine trying to get 4 motorbikes in a van from one place to another? How much that costs alone? You know, then you've got to put fuel in, then you've got to get riders, and you've got to pay writers, all this stuff. You know, good journalism costs money, and it's a shame that there's less money in journalism now because online people want things for free, which is understandable, but it kind of means that, you know, the likes of this style MCN is no longer. You know, it's evolved in a different way really to be a little bit more cost effective, but you know, these were the days. It was just incredible. But I digress. So we headed off to Sicily and saw our friends at Pirelli, who help us with a lot of group tests. So what Pirelli help us with, locations, tracks in Sicily, roads in Sicily. Pirelli's head of motorcycle tyre testing is based there. You know, they test tyres on different sorts of tracks, different sorts of roads. They've got Mount Etna in the snow, they've got hot weather, they've got all these different conditions, which, you know, goes a long way to explaining why, you know, Pirelli and Metzeler produce some of the best tyres right now. And yeah, so this was a big production. A load of us flew to Sicily to make a video and to produce this test. We had Bruce Dunn, who's one of our freelance road testers, does all our performance testing. We had Chad, who was my fellow road tester at the time. Neil Hodgson again. I was there, and a couple of Pirelli test riders. And then the bikes. So we had the class of 2012. We had the Honda Fireblade, which was £11,000, 175 bhp. We had ZX10, 13 grand, 197 bhp. S1000RR, 13.5 grand, 190 bhp. MV Agusta F3 Corsa Quarter, 18 grand, 201 bhp. Aprilia RSV Factory APRC, that was one of the first ones with all the electronics, 16.5 grand, 180 bhp. And then the Panigale 1199 S, 19750, 195 bhp. So we rode all these on the track. We used control tyres because all these bikes come on different tyres, and if you leave the standard tyres on, there's such a difference in performance that it would skew the result. So all the same tyres, and we spent a few days on track messing around on some superbikes, which is very good fun. But it was also a test as we kind of went through, where the S1000RR maintained its kind of stranglehold on the 1000 class. So on the track, it was the fastest, and it was the easiest to ride, and the same goes on the road as well. And I remember at the time Ducati weren't very happy, and they were really looking into the way we performed the test. But I think as time evolved, they realised there was a small problem with the Panigale, and it was down to its stability. I know they changed links along the way, linkages, to try and make it more stable, but when you rode the Panigale hard, it was a little bit wild. And like I say, it's kind of stayed wild all the way until recently, when electronics have kind of calmed it down. So yeah, the Ducati was it finished second behind the BMW. What was third? The Aprilia was third, Kawasaki fourth, Honda fifth, and MV at the back. Yeah, the MV was an absolute pig. The lap times with Pirelli's test rider who knows that track inside out, his name's Alfio Tricomi. He's like their Stig. So yeah, the lap times on the BMW 147.9 and on the Ducati 149.3, so 2 seconds in it. Yeah, 49 for the Honda, surprisingly the same as the Ducati, even though the Honda was a lot slower down the straights. 148 Kawasaki, 150 MV, so it was a pig. 149 for Aprilia. And the BMW was fastest in the hands of Bruce Dunn and Neil Hodgson. So Bruce did a 152 on the Ducati, Neil did a 149, and this Alfio did a 147 because he's an absolute animal. So yeah, it was an amazing motorcycle. Kind of a little bit disappointing that it didn't absolutely dominate all the group test or racing, but yeah, I think there was a sort of a fundamental problem when you pushed it hard, but it's still an absolutely beautiful bike. Because it'd be rude not to talk. You can switch off now, so I'm going to kind of stop talking about the Ducati in so many words. But you know, this particular MCN, we did a really beautiful Ducati special. So we rocked up at Silverstone in the Stowe circuit. This garage here is the garages in the Stowe circuit, and we assembled all these amazing Ducatis. So we had the original 916, 114 bhp, went from 94 to 98. The 888, one of my favourites. What's that? 98 bhp, 92, 93, that one. The 851, first generation of the Ducati superbikes, absolutely beautiful. Those Ducatis sound amazing, real deep bellow to them, because you know, along with quieter exhaust with Euro 5 and stuff like that, the engines themselves have to be quieter. Yeah, 851, what else we got here? 999R, which came out in 2006, 150 bhp. 1198 SP 2011, that's 170 bhp. 996R, absolutely beautiful, 135 bhp. Yes, just seeing all these bikes in one place, I mean, that was a great day. Hodgson got to ride all those as well, the lucky devil. Absolutely amazing. Little comment from Troy Bayliss. First time I saw the Panigale, it looked like a heap of shit. I'm sure he didn't mean that later on. Yeah, so then we went on, we gave the 1199 Panigale to Chad and got him to ride it at his favourite place on the TT. Yeah, what a day out that must have been. He gave it to Johnny Barton, TT racer there, and the guy that shows people around. He loved it. Later on in MCM, we got a really great interview from Kev Ash, God rest his soul, how Ducati became $1 billion firm. So yeah, Audi's 1.1 billion purchase of Ducati marks the climax of 16-year rags to riches saga for the Italian firm. Yeah, with the help of current and former MCN bosses, MCN analysed its stellar rebirth. So of course that's when things really changed for Ducati, when Audi got involved, and you know, they've evolved to a point now where they're still an Italian firm with Italian sort of sensibilities and style and passion and all the rest of it, but you know, you can tell the Audi genes with the way they're organised and they go about their business, which is why they're so successful. We talk about Paul Smart, God rest his soul, and his Imola win on a Ducati. Yeah, he said, I thought it was this great big horrible long wheelbase thing. Despite Paul Smart's misgivings, Ducati's 750 turned out to be a superb race bike. Here's the inside story of how a V-twin 4-stroke beat an Armada of Grand Prix Exotica and set the Ducati superbike template. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Then a bit of a tech watch from Kev Ash. I mean, I spoke in one of these other videos about people I read. Obviously, I loved Kev Ash, but to be honest, a lot of it was over the top of my head. And he's picked out like a little detail about how Ducati saved a kilogram on Panigale's forks with stanchions or aluminium with a hard anodized surface layer. Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. We've got more stuff. We've got an interview with Massimo Bordi, who's the guy who designed the engines for the 888 and the 916, and talking about what a pain Tamburini was, because even though he was a talented designer, he was a bit slow and he didn't really care about money. I can imagine. And then what have we got? And then in the sports section, there's lots of Rossi stories back in 2012, you know, and in April 2012 we're already talking about him, you know, wanting to leave Ducati and go to Yamaha, which of course we did. And then the story here is, if Valentino wants to return to Yamaha, new MotoGP rules mean he'll have to talk to Tech 3 boss Hervé Poncharal. So yeah, for a time we thought that Rossi might partner Bradley Smith in the monster Yamaha squad, which would have been fun, wouldn't it? More Ducatis, talking about something which still goes on now in WSB with the rules to level up the performance. So everybody was thinking that the Ducati was a little bit too advanced, a little bit too lightweight. There's a story that keeps on going, doesn't it? You can say that now with the V4 and Bautista. But it's only ever one Ducati that's dominant, isn't it? And generally I think, you know, it's obviously the bike, but the rider makes a big difference as well. You know, whether it's Shaky or Carlos Checa, who won World Superbike for Ducati, or Bautista, I think if you click with the Ducati and you really learn how to ride it, it is unbeatable. But for other people, maybe it's not. So this story talks about how the 4-cylinder bikes have been given a reduced weight limit, but that how none of the manufacturers really are taking advantage of that, and they're still quite heavy. And the Ducati is even heavier, and it's still winning. We've got a story about Guintoli. Guintoli is just a legend, X250, ex-MotoGP, World Endurance winner now, Sky, BT Sport commentator, just fantastic. And he's winning on a Ducati 1198 there. And then just going back to that original MCM with a story at the back, again about Rossi. And Neil Spalding, who used to do a lot of technical writing for us. Again, massive talent when it comes to engineering and understanding what makes bikes tick. Kind of just looking at, you know, when the bikes were tested over the winter, you know, they were photographed to within an inch of their lives, and all the technical experts try and figure out what makes it tick. So with Rossi's bike for 2012, we're kind of guessing that its engine must be a 925cc, which could give it higher RPM, wider spread of power and lighter crankshaft. We've got different frame, new dash, the bike's shorter and higher. What else we got? The tacho reads to 19,000 RPM. That's pretty mad, isn't it? More padding on the seat. Talking of high revs, I got to ride Stoner's bike in 2007 at Valencia after the race, his Ducati, and I thought I was revving it to the moon down the front straight. Must have been 16 odd thousand revs, and it sounded like it was going to blow up, and it's really hot to the point where it kind of starts to scald your forearms. How they rode those things in places like Malaysia, I just do not know. And when I came into the pits and just said how high it revs, they said, well, you're not revving it because this thing goes to 19 to 20,000 RPM. And that's when it was an 800. So it really did rev then. Going back to the Panigales, if you fancy a 2012 original Panigale, they're still holding on to their money well. So if you wanted a standard one, you're looking at about £10,500. And if you're looking at the S model 11.6, you know, they're definitely a landmark superbike for Ducati for all the reasons we've just talked about. Probably not the best superbike for Ducati. You know, the 1299 came along a few years later, 2015, and that was obviously better. It was more refined in every way, had more oomph, and the 1199 turned out to be a bit of an angry little devil, but still an amazing bike. You know, even today, they make you feel special. You know, I've ridden one recently at Donington. I was actually doing a little test with a university where they rigged the bike up with sensors to see how much force you were putting through the controls, how much force you were putting through the foot pegs, how much force it needed to counter steer down Craner curves on an 1199, which they'd rigged all this stuff on. It was a 30 kilo push to get the bike from side to side through Craner. So it's like doing a bench press, which is why when you go fast on a motorbike, it's so physical. Anyway, I digress. talking rubbish again. So yeah, have any of you got any Panigale stories? If you have, I'd love to hear them. If you've got any questions about this or anything else that happens in road test land, just stick them on the comments, and I'll answer them in the next Q&A. But thanks very much for watching. This was really interesting for me, this walk down road testing memory lane, and the Ducati 1199 Panigale. Fantastic bike, fantastic experience, and thank you for watching.